At magandang araw mga kababayan, kayo'y nakikinig dito lamang sa Radyo Migrante on Vibe 105, Toronto's best Filipino community radio show. Samahan niyo kami ngayong January 18th, 2026 at atin alamin ang mga ganap sa ating komunidad dito sa Toronto at sa Pilipinas. Simulan natin ang tema ngayong episode na we called as Kabataan Nangunguna from First Quarter Storm to Now. Mapapag-usapan natin ang ilang maiinit na balita, mga issues na hinaharap ng mga kabataan sa Pilipinas or maging overseas. We'll also share a reflection on why overseas Filipino youth may have taken interest in staying connected to the Philippines. In support of the Release Chantal Anicoche Campaign, we'll also highlight and connect it to the long history of youth leading movements like the First Quarter Storm in 1970s. And last but not least, ako po si Host Ems at ako po ang magdadala sa inyo ang maiinit na balita at issue at kaysaysayan ngayong linggo. Simulan na po natin, no? Makailanman, lumabas ang bali-balita sa social media na ihihinto raw ang open work permit ng 2026 at visa-free na raw ang pa-Canada ang mga Philippine passport holders. Is this true? Maraming mga kababayan ang nangamba at nagdiwa sa mga balitang ito. Pero ano nga ba ang katotohanan? Alamin po natin. Nagkalat sa Facebook ng mga tito at tita, lolo at lolo, ang mga headlines na open work permits are ending in 2026. Maraming kababayan, international graduates, spouses, and workers ang maapektuhan ng balitang ito pag nagkataon. Pero bago po tayo mga po, payo ng licensed paralegal na si Apple Apuntar, ang mga balita nito ay unang-una, misleading at sensationalized. Kay Apuntar, wala pang official na announcement ang IRCC at hindi dapat maniwala sa mga unverified news sources. Again, sabi ni Apple Apuntar, hindi totoo na mag-e-end ang work permit in 2026. Sa Immigration Levels Plan ng Canada released in November 2025, ang target ng Canada para sa work permits under the International Mobility Program ay 510,000 for the next 3 years. Ang IMP ay mga LMIA exempt work permits kasama ng PGWP at iba pang open work permits. This was a post by Apple Apuntar. Pangalawang misinformation, balak mo bang imbitahan ba sa Canada sila ate, kuya, tito, tita o mga LDR dyan, mga jowa matagal na hindi nagkikita? Sabi-sabi na visa-free na daw ang Canada. Well, flight lang na lang ang kulang ang sabi nila. Pero teka, bago i-book ang flight na yan, alamin natin kung tama ba ang impormasyon nito. Kasama ang Pilipinas sa listahan ng IRCC na legible sa Electronic Travel Authorization or also known as ETA. According to the IRCC, citizens from some visa-required countries can be eligible to apply for this ETA instead of a visa to travel to Canada by air. Ang mga kababayan na may hawak na Philippine passport ay pwedeng mag-apply sa ETA nito to enter Canada. Quote, not quote, but underline bold asterisk. But to get authorization at mag-apply, you must meet mga certain criteria. Para mag-qualify para sa ETA, you must either have 1. Held a Canadian visitor visa in the past 10 years. Pangalawa, hindi marunong po ako magbilang. Pangalawa, currently possesses a valid non-immigrant visa for the United States. Pangatlo, ang ETA ay only applicable for travelers arriving in Canada by air. At para sa ibang impormasyon, ugaliin natin bisitahin ang official website ng IRCC. Naririnig po natin ang mga salita, fake news yan. Ano ba ay ibig sabihin ng fake news? It's actually definition niya parang there's 2 types of fake news, no? May disinformation at misinformation. Ang misinformation ay mga impormasyon na mga facts na mali or inaccurate. Whereas ang disinformation naman ay ito mas nakakatakot po, no? Ito mga facts or mga sources that are deliberate, na intended talaga na i-mislead ang mga nakikinig or yun nagbabasa. Ang pagiging critical ay hindi ibig sabihin nagdududa sa lahat, pero ito ay isang bahagi ng pag-aaral at para mausisa natin ang katotohanan. So ito po ang 4 na ways na pwede natin i-challenge ang mga naririnig nating mga news sources para alam natin kung yung mga nababasa natin, naririnig natin, comes from factual and evidence-based claims. According sa News Media Canada, there are ways to help ourselves to identify fake news. When we see fake news or when we see news, we have to spot. Ano ba ibig sabihin ng spot? Number 1, S. Is this source credible? Titignan natin kung may base ba tong source natin. Is it a real news outlet? Is it from a researcher, or is it just from a random account on Facebook? P. Is this perspective bias? May bias ba ang perspektibo nito? Sinashare ba ang buong katotohanan ng buong story? O. Are there other sources reporting the same story? Kadalasan, credible news is reported in multiple different platforms and sources. At T, is yung story timely? Pag repost ng mga lumang storya, hindi ibig sabihin relevant pa sila sa current na pangyayari. So that is how you spot fake news. At mga kababayan, remember, critical thinking hindi ibig sabihin ay nagdududa sa lahat. Pero ang critical thinking, ang pag-iisip kung saan nanggagaling ang source, is about learning ang katotohanan. Kasi ang katotohanan is the only way to break the fake. At dito lang po kayo nakikinig sa Radyo Migrante, Toronto's best Filipino community radio show, only on Vibe 105. And mula sa episode natin last week, napag-usapan natin si Chantal Anicoche, kilalang Filipino-American community leader at graduate ng University of Maryland, Baltimore County sa Amerika. Kamakailan lang, noong January 1st, 2026, mula sa isinagawang aerial bomb ng AFP sa Abra de Ilog, Occidental Mindoro, isa siya sa mga researcher na nasa area noong ito ay nangyari, and now she is being held without legal cause by the Armed Forces of the Philippines at Camp Kapinpin in Rizal. Patuloy ang panawagan sa kanyang immediate release. Kabilang din dito ay nagluluksa ang isa sa mga nagsawi na si Jerlyn Rose Doydora. Isa siyang miyembro ng General Secretariat ng Kabataan Party List at estudyante ng pamataasan ng lungsod ng Maynila. She died in the middle of sickness habang walang habas ang pagbobomba ng pamamaril ng 203rd Infantry Brigade sa Abra de Ilog, Occidental Mindoro. Pakikiramay po sa kanyang pamilya at mga kaibigan, with that they are also calling to allow the independent fact-finding mission of humanitarian groups to determine what she went through at the time and the effects of militarization in Mindoro. Si Jerlyn ay matapang at mapagmahal para sa bayan dahil siya at ang iba pa niyang mga nakasama ay pinili na alamin at pag-aralin ang kalagayan ng mga indigenous people or mangyan sa gitna tumitindig na militarization sa Occidental Mindoro. Justice for Jerlyn Rose Doydora, stop the bombings and the overkill military operations and state terror in Mindoro. Naglalabas ng statement ang Malaya Movement USA para sa pasisinungaling at kondenahin ang mga pahayag ng NTF-ELCAC. Inaalala kuno ng NTF-ELCAC ang kaligtasan ni Chantal. They claim It is outrageous that this is the very same government body that has sown nationwide terror and systematized red tagging and attacks on human rights advocates and activists, has the gall to claim that it is committed to uphold human rights, due process, and transparency when it has done nothing but the complete opposite. Malaya Movement USA continues to say that the NTF-LCAC deceptive statement desperately tries to villainize progressive organizations that bring international attention to the plight of indigenous and peasant communities in the Philippines. They are intentionally obscuring the real questions, which is, why did the AFP bomb civilian communities on New Year's Day and kill 3 Mangyan Iraya children along with Jerlyn Doydora? Why is the AFP blocking human rights organizations from conducting fact-finding missions in Abra de Ilog? Why have they continued to deny Chantal her right to speak to her own lawyers and human rights organizations? And lastly, why is she being kept incommunicado from those who truly care about her well-being and safety? End quote. At para kilalanin natin si Chantal, ito ang isang video na shinare ng Filipino Student Association of UMBC or University of Maryland, Baltimore County. Pakinggan po natin.
Hello, my name is Chantal Anicoche. I'm 22 years old and I graduated from UMBC in May 2023 as a psych major, so I am fresh out of there. I now work for Baltimore City Public Schools as a substitute teacher. When I was still a student, my time in FASA felt so special to me because as a Filipino who grew up in the US, it was the first space to relate with others through a shared identity and appreciation for Filipino culture. And I was never alone in wanting to learn more about Filipino culture in FASA. Initially, it meant relating with others in FASA through shared experiences that we associated with being Filipino, like food, language, and music. Sometimes, we would even talk about our differences. What felt familiar to myself would be new for others. Not only is Filipino culture so diverse, but people can experience it differently based on their livelihoods. It is fluid and not separate from conditions like financial hardship or forced migration that affect those abroad and back home. During Pistahan of 2023, me and dancers used tinikling as a way to raise awareness of the difficult and exploitative livelihood of farmers and farm workers in the Philippines. We dressed up in simple clothing as farmers back home do, and in the spirit of understanding their conditions, we made dance moves inspired by the harsh yet important planting and harvesting of rice by hand. Together through tinikling, the dancers and I learned more about Filipino culture by collectively representing the majority of Filipinos who live in the province and countryside. I am still besties with some of the dancers today. The friendships I made through FASA kept me wondering why and how our families moved to the US in the first place, because there were patterns in our migration stories. I sought for answers. Educational discussions and actions led by local organizations such as Kabataan Alliance DMD showed to me that Filipinos abroad have a responsibility to take up the concerns of those in the Philippines who are currently speaking out against unaffordable prices of basic goods and tuition for students, lowered wages for workers, massive budget cuts to public services such as transportation and education, military pollution and deforestation, and above all, violence from the Philippine government against people as young as me who have chosen to speak up and taken action against these unfair conditions. It has been through active participation and learning from others that I understand Filipino culture is affected by the economy and politics, that it is not a mere individual definition, but a collective one that strives to demand for better conditions. I have been touched by the youth and activists who dare to fight back against injustice and inequality for a better future for themselves and for our country. It is in the spirit of Philippine history that many youths stand against the continued hardship of Filipinos, including my family, who are part of the millions of workers forced to leave the Philippines in search for a better livelihood across the world to places such as the US since 1974. My parents came to the US to work as nurses at Johns Hopkins in 2002. Ever since I was little, they always told me to finish college and work hard just like they did. They told me we would have a better life in the United States than in the Philippines because of the economic conditions. And for as long as I can remember, there was a part of me that wanted to understand what they meant, bringing me to join FASA and KADMV. The more connections and relationships we make, the better, which is why I'm so glad to be organized today. While the work is very serious and urgent, we also have a great time. I urge any of you who are curious about Philippine history, whether that be our resistance against colonialism or even your personal migration story, there's no better time to start than now. Reach out to KADMB to take part in educational group studies and local actions. As individuals, we can only do so much, but together, we will struggle to achieve a better community as Filipino people. Thank you.
At patuloy po kayo nakikinig sa Radyo Migrante on Vibe 105. Kasama ang Radyo Migrante, tagabalita at boses ng migranteng Pilipino. We stand in solidarity with Chantal Anicoche, her family and colleagues, and communities of Mindoro. And to take us away to before our break, ito po ang kanta from Versol, Alex and Psycho, Bakit, Why? It is a song from the Rock the Mic for Human Rights in the Philippines, Stop the Killings album by ICHIRP or International Coalition for Human Rights in the Philippines. Pakinggan po natin.
Government killing our people who done not a thing. Innocent families living through tragedies, hardest in pieces to know this is happening. Tell me what's it gonna take? What more do we gotta do to make it go away? Men are now in chains and it's inhumane that they live in this way, and it's never okay to pull families away. Stripping the rich, learning, giving, not take how they taking our money for war on drugs, funding the horror. I gonna support our blood thicker than water. The sons and the daughters need love. So fuck the war on drugs. So we all need love. So fuck the war on drugs and we just spread love. I just wanna see our people thrive. Where our people lie, they shouldn't have to die. Legacies, good memories. I see our people rise when I close my eyes. So we have to fight for a better life. Use this voice I got to bring the wrong to light and try to make things right. Bring some sense to mind. These politicians need to stop taking lives. That's not the answer and never is. How you take the future from a little kid? You take from those with not much to give. I'm ashamed of the so-called government, cause you take the dirt and you rub it in. You supposed to help but you put danger in. The motherland deserves a better plan. No broken promise, so we take a stand.
And I get a reason why.
Can I get a reason why? Tell me, can I get a reason why?
Our home is not a home.
Our home is not a home. Our home is not a
Where
home.
peace and love used to
Peace and love,
live.
peace and love, peace and love.
It's time to rise and
Time to
resist.
rise, time to rise and resist.
Muli nating talakayin ang mga nangyayari, kondisyon at ang sistema at iba't ibang bahagi. Yung mga mapangaping kasalukuyan naghahari, makabayan kunwari kaya nga rataking daliri. Ang sabi kaliwa, bakit bigla tong kumakanan? Harap-harapan kung mga ngunit kinatalikuran. Nakatalon lang ng bakuran, nasubukan ng upuan. Kung umasta ay para bang kulang sa batok ng magulang. Sa pababuka ng bunganga ay meron na namang pauso. Bagong ang apelido pero ganon pa rin estilo. Kaya dami ng dugo na umaagos sa kamay mo. Mga namatay at biktima dahil sa utos mo. Proseso nga ba ang bala kapalit ng buhay ng bata? Kinalagkad nyo pa sa lupa dahil lamang sa akala. tama na, bumaba ka na. Anong malala, lumala na nga. Paasa ka, sinungaling paso, pwede ba na tama na?
Patuloy kayo nakikinig dito sa Radyo Migrante on Vibe 105. Huwag po kayong aalis mga karadmig. After the break, magbalik tanaw tayo sa mahalagang kasaysayan about the first quarter storm. At patuloy po kayo nakikinig dito sa Radyo Migrante, Toronto's best Filipino community radio show. Samahan niyo po kami sa ating segment na ating kasaysayan. And let's learn more about Filipino history to remind ourselves that history or kasaysayan is a way that we get to know about ourselves as Filipino and our culture. Kaya, let's travel back in time sa 1960s sa Manila, sa Philippines, for our kasaysayan segment. And in the 1960s, many recollect it as a time in the Philippines as a period of significant change, marked by blend of traditional values and modern influences by the Western world. And this is not surprising. However, the country continued to grow its nationalist sentiment. Kung tutuusin po, mababalikan natin itong sa kasaysayan ang sentiment nito for an independent Philippines since the time of the Katipuneros. The presence of the seemingly anti-American politics in the Philippines also made way for the U.S. to support the Marcos presidency and his future declaration ng martial law. Kaya, by 1965, si President Ferdinand Marcos Sr. assumed office as the President of the Philippines. During his first term, he presented himself with a fabricated military heroism and promised to change Philippine politics. Pero sa kasaysayan, ang kanyang presidency ay nakatulong sa pag-funnel ng money to his families and cronies, rewarding mga alyado niya, and punishing and silencing critics and enemies. Under the Marcos presidency, the national debt increased, where poverty also intensified. Ang pagtataas ng utang ng bansa at kahirapan, ramdam na ramdam ng mga mamamayang Pilipino, ang kahirapan at ang korupsyon. On top of this, the United States of government, siya ay strong supporter, as I mentioned earlier, ng administrasyon, allowing the Philippines to be a significant site for U.S. military bases throughout Marcos's presidency. Ika nga sa isang reflection ng mga Filipino sa 1960s, it was a dynamic period characterized by a strong sense of national identity, rooted cultural traditions, evolving social norms, and growing economic, political challenges that would lay the groundwork for the tumultuous years ahead. And as Justin Umali rightfully says, it has been said that there are decades where nothing happens, and there are weeks where decades happen. Kaya for the Philippines, during January to March 1970, the first quarter storm was the latter. End quote. So ano ba ang sigwa ng unang sangkapat or first quarter storm? Ang FQS ay tumutukoy sa mga protesta, marcha at pag-oorganisa ng sambayanan laban kay Marcos Sr. noong unang taon of 1970. From January hanggang March, sama-sama ang mga sektor ng estudyante, mga kabataan, manggagawa at magsasaka, kababaihan at iba pa sa kalye na magprotesta, nagtitipon at inaaral ang lipunan. Hindi bababa ng 10,000 ang mga umaattend sa kanilang mga protesta noong panahon na yun. Umabot pa nga daw ng 100,000 na katao sa ibang mga protesta. Kaya tumpak naman itong paglarawan sa panahon ito bilang sigwa, the first quarter storm. This resistance was met with brutal force by the police. The Battle of Mendiola was the most violent of the first quarter storm. Many activists were members of national democratic organizations katulad ng Kabataan Makabayan and Makikibaka. Kabataan Makabayan was an anti-imperialist youth and student organization founded in 1964, and Makibaka, a women's liberation organization founded in 1970s. So bakit ba nagkaroon ng FQS ng 1970s? Overall, we talked about how the United States continued to grasp a hold in Philippine land through military bases and Philippine politics. Pero during this time, from 1965 onwards, we saw that the Philippine economics was also falling. Mas tumataas ang poverty, mas tumataas ang corruption, mas tumataas ang debt ng government under the Marcos regime. Pangalawa, ang heightened political conscience ng kabataan. Ika nga sa mga research, the student movement surges forward a few years after the founding of the National Youth in 1964. Similar progressive student groups were formed, the campus press is radicalized, and other moderate youth organizations continued to sprout. And sa first quarter storm, konteksto din was Ferdinand Marcos Sr. was sworn for its second term in 1970s. This is what gave way to the increased agitation of Filipino youth and the people. So on January 27, 1970s, when Marcos provided his SONA or his State of the Nation address, this was when National Union of Students of the Philippines organized a mobilization and called for a non-partisan constitutional convention. Other groups joined to support, and at the tail of the evening, violence erupted against mga protesters and the police. Pagkatapos ng after that, January 27, 4 days later, mga protesta marched to Congress to denounce state fascism and police brutality, also ending in violent crashes with state forces. Pero hindi nagtapos mga protesta at mga demonstration sa Enero po. Ito'y pag-umpisa sa isang nagsiklab na pagliyab sa mga mamayang Pilipino from February to March. Sa unahan, mga kabataan na ang tuloy-tuloy naglaban. Fast forward to March 1970s, thousands joined the People's March. Nagtipon-tipon ang mga estudyante, manggagawa, mga pisante, mga driver, mga urban poor, at lahat iba-ibang tao sa ibang sektor. Sinabi nga sa research by Justin Umali, Manila was totally paralyzed. The day before, ang transport sector went on strike to protest against corrupt cops. Again, the police forcibly dispersed ang People's March, and during this time, a student, Enrica Santa Maria, was captured and tortured to death. March 17th marked as the last event sa first quarter storm, kung saan ang mga mamayan continued to march and demonstrate that the enemy of the people on the urban poor was US imperialism, Marcos, and repressive tactics na ginagamit, katulad ng silence in media and police brutality. Again, groups were met with brute dispersal by the Manila police. Ang first quarter storm ay naging paraan for the upcoming events in the 1970s specifically. First, yung Plaza Miranda bombings, the Diliman Commune, pag-suspend ng writ of habeas corpus, at there were ongoing protests that continued to happen, all leading up to 1972, kung saan dineklara ni Marcos ang martial law. Hanggang ngayon, makikita natin how does first quarter storm relate to the present day. Kasi nakikita pa rin natin mga sigaw para sa kalayaan at sapat na pamumuhay sa Pilipinas. Hindi pa rin nakakamit at binibigyan lubos na pansin ng mga sumusunod na administrasyon. And in a reflection by the College Editors Guild of the Philippines, they said reliving the first quarter storm is not only relevant but necessary to topple the current administration. This was during the time of Duterte because they highlighted that Duterte is in fact worse than the Marcos, killing around 30,000 in murderous drug war and even killed thousands more from the toiling masses in counter-insurgency program called the NTF-LCAC, or National Task Force to End the Local Communist Armed Conflict. While this was a predated statement, the current administration continues to tout similar tactics to his predecessors. At base sa ating kaysaysayan, mas masaklap ang pangungurakot ng administrasyon sa mga pork barrel scams, flood control projects, increased budgets for confidential funds, habang hindi binibigyan lubos na pansin na naman ang social services, trabaho sa loob ng Pilipinas, at mga karapatan pantao, karapatan ng mangsasaka at indigenous people para sa lupa, at sapat na sahod at mababang presyo para mamuhay. Therefore, remembering ang first quarter storm po, hindi lang to para i-romanticize, but a way para mag-reflect on the power of the Filipino people and the democratic mass resistance. What lessons will we take so that we can continue to fight through and through? After reading more about yung kaysaysayan, evident po na during the first quarter storm, it was the youth and the student leaders that dared to struggle, learn from the masses, and fight against fascist and corrupt government. That has not changed today. Students and youth continue to rage against corruption, turn to the streets to clamor for justice. Youth continue to show that hindi sila mananahimik by state fascism and terror. Kaya, to close this segment off, I leave our listeners with a poem by Eman Lakaba, who was a youth and a poet who searched for meaning and relevance in his art and life and discovered these in the midst of the Filipino masses. In addition, according to the Bantayog ng mga bayani, Eman Lakaba was perhaps the first known creative writer to join the armed struggle against the Marcos dictatorship. Ito po ang tula niya, Kung Ako'y Mamamatay. Kung ako'y mamamatay, oo, marami nga. Ang mga iiyakan, di lang kamag-anak, kundi kaibigan sa iniwang lunsod, dating kaeskwela kasama sa trabaho, at intelektual na mahilig sa tula. At lalo-lalo na ang mga magsasaka at manggagawa sa akin nagbuhos ng kaysaysayan ng mapait nilang buhay. Oo, matutuwa ako kung pupunta silang lahat sa aking luksa at libing. Kung pupunuin nila ang buong lansangan sa huling marchas ng aking kabaong na nababalot ng banderang pula na may masot, karet at 3 bituin. Higit na kung sila'y magsisimulang magtanong, para kanino bakit siya namatay? Subalit, pareho lang sa akin kung sa kasukalan lamang ako malugmok upang ibaon ng uod at damo. Nang walang alaala, walang pangalan. Sapat na kung masamang minahal ang magbangon. Magwasak sa ating piitang bulok. Lumikha ng lipunan ng liwanag, oo. Liwanag na sa loob kung ako'y mamatay. You're listening to Radyo Migrante on Vibe 105. So hearing stories and history about back home makes us question kung nga, bakit ba umuwi mga katulad ni Chantal sa kabila ng kanyang pagiging komportable sa Amerika? O bakit nga ba mga katulad ni Jerlene Doydora choose to dedicate their life to serve the people instead of living a comfortable life? So, we reflect on why Filipino youth feel compelled to stay connected to the Philippines on our pulso this week. Pakinggan natin ang boses ng mga kabataan na umattend ng watch party ng EDJOP, isang pelikula tungkol kay Edgar Jobson, a youth leader that was known during the first quarter storm and sa martial law. Pakinggan po natin.
Because I grew up here and I did not have a strong Filipino community, or at least one that's like very bonded with the homeland, like it was very hard for me to even connect with the homeland in general for most of my life, much less understand the issues and conditions at home. Kaya naman napaka-importante for me to learn about those issues, not just learn about them, but also be active in organizations fighting for better conditions for Filipino communities, both in the homeland and the diaspora, because I feel like it's an obligation for us diaspora who had to leave because of the deteriorating conditions at home to support the people in the homeland, because they are our people. So no matter where we are in the world, we always have to support them. That's why it shouldn't be criminalized to support the people at home and to go home. The more I get organized, the more I realize it's not just the action of going home, it's also the spirit of supporting the people there. We are calling on the government to stop criminalizing Filipinos who are going home to support the communities, because they're doing something that they have never done and never will do, and it's actually support the people. And it's ironic because like one day an economic means for them to support the people of the homeland, they say, oh, you should go work abroad so that you can send money back home as a way to support the people. But then when people, Filipinos from abroad, actually do meaningful things to support the people back home, whether it's organizing like an anak bayan or what Chantal did when she went home and materially supported the her Mindoro community, you see like what they did. They obviously bombed the community and they still have her unjustly in custody. So obviously there's irony there that we all recognize. So that's why it's so important for us to call out the government for criminalizing, for supporting the people, something they never do. And that's why we continue to call for the release of Chantal, justice for the Mindoro community that was bombed.
I think it's really important for these to go back home and reconnect with the Philippines, especially now more than ever, after everything that Chantal has gone through. For my personal experience, I was born here in Canada, but I have returned to the Philippines a couple times. I went in 2008 when I was a kid, and then I had a really long gap where I didn't go, and I went back just 2 years ago, 2023. Before going back to the Philippines, I was kind of scared since I haven't seen my family in a long time, and I was wondering how I'd be treated there since I am mixed. But it was really a pleasant experience, and I went back again this year as well. And both those times taught me, especially this time around, going in now this year as I joined AB, or last year in 2025 after I joined AB. It was just a really humbling experience. I got really to connect with not only my family, but also the people of the Philippines, the workers, along as well as seeing the farmers. My mom has a background in farming, so going to see her family who are farmers was also just meant a lot for me, just seeing what they've been through. I also went during election time, so also observing how chaotic the elections are and what we have to go through in order to elect officials and how broken the system is also adds a lot as well. So I think it's super important just for the youth in Canada just to go to the Philippines to open their eyes and just see what's going on and connected back home. It could either be with your family or it could be on an immersion trip like Chantal does. I think it's just a really good way to get in touch with your culture and see how we can help the Philippines and find better ways to like introduce or just like push for national democracy in the Philippines as well. Yeah.
And thank yous to the Filipino youth who have shared on why Filipino youth feel compelled to stay connected to the Philippines. At dito nagtatapos isang makabuluhang ating kaysaysayan about the first quarter storm. So continue to stay informed, remember the history, stay critical, at higit sa lahat, stay involved. At syempre, to stay updated sa ating happenings, narito po ang ating community announcements. The Anak Bayan Toronto 13th General Assembly called Youth Make History, January 24th at 2026 at 2 p.m. on 601 Christie Street, Suite 107 Canvas Program. Visit their Instagram account at Anak Bayan Toronto to register for the link in their bio. And there are multiple petitions that we can support for this week. First, unang-una is the Mary Jane Veloso petition. Sa pagpasok ng 2026, hindi natin pwede makalimutan si Mary Jane Veloso. For approximately 15 years, Mary Jane Veloso has been the face of the struggle of Filipino migrant workers. A victim of human trafficking, she was tricked by recruiters and spent over a decade on death row in Indonesia. At ngayon, kahit nasa Pilipinas na siya, nananatili pa rin siya nakakulong. Ang panawagan ng Migrante Ontario, palayain si Mary Jane Veloso. Demand the Philippine government grant Mary Jane Veloso immediate and unconditional release. Sign the petition at bit.ly/freemjv2026. That's spelled as bit.ly/FREEMJV2026. Another petition we can support is the Stop Bill C-12. Bill C-12 is the Strengthening Canada's Immigration System and Borders Act, and it's entering its final stage in the Senate. This threatens to undermine migrant rights, granting the government unchecked power to cancel permits, bar refugee claims after 1 year, and expand surveillance without oversight. With the Senate returning to the debate on February 3, this is the last chance to stop the bill. So take action now by emailing your senators to demand a no vote. Go to migrantrights.ca/actions list/vote no C-12. And last but not least, MRCC, the Migrants Resource Center Canada, continues to call for volunteers with experience with data entry and casework to support the high volumes of cases. Para mag-volunteer po, you can submit your applications at migrantsresourcecenter.ca/volunteer. At kung interesado po kayo, i-advertise ang mga iyong events, company, or organizations, pwedeng-pwede po yan dito sa Radyo Migrante. Just send us an email about your event, about your organization, and malalagay natin sa next week episodes and the ongoing. However you need. As again, we are a community radio and we would love to support and continue to amplify and support local organizations, local Filipino events, and also any local news that you want to highlight. That is all possible, so email us at radyomigrantefm@gmail.com. That's radyomigrantefm@gmail.com. Ayun. And kung interesado po kayo maging bahagi ng Radyo Migrante, tara na po, sumali na sa Radyo Migrante Collective. I-message nyo lang po kami sa aming social media. Makikita nyo kami sa Facebook, Instagram, at sa YouTube. At dito na naman po nagtatapos ang isang makabuluhang episode ng Radyo Migrante. Maraming salamat sa pakikinig. Samahan niyo kami muli sa susunod na linggo mula 1:00 hanggang 2:00 ng hapon. Dito pa rin sa Vibe 105 FM. Sa tulong ng ating mga kababayan na bumubuo ng Radyo Migrante, kay Carl Ramirez for his song Migranteng Pilipino, at higit po sa lahat sa inyo. Sa inyo po na sumusuporta sa amin, maraming salamat po. And of course, hindi namin makakalimutan, makikibaka para kay Frenchie May Cumpio, whose trial is and her hearing is coming up shortly in the upcoming weeks. Defend press freedom and demand justice for journalists silenced for speaking truth to power. And with that, Hanggang sa susunod mga kababayan, muli mabuhay po kayo at mabuhay ang bayang Pilipinas.